This is the Enochs Show, America's most controversial podcast, coming to you live from UNT with Lee Enochs,
Devin Scott,
Jackson Carter Pullmeyer,
and Brock Bergen.
in our studio. Well, actually on Zoom. Where are you at right now, Walter? Are you in Canada?
I am in Canada, yes.
Are you on a sabbatical from the school in New Orleans?
I am a professor at Loyola University, New Orleans, and I'm on sabbatical this semester.
Oh, that's great. I went down there a few years ago in sweltering hot Louisiana, New Orleans. We had seafood gumbo down there. It was great. It was a great time. And Walter, you're my favorite guest. You have a favorite position here on the Lee Enochs Show. We want to get right into the issue of funding the Ukraine and Israel. Obviously, there's a massive war going on now between Israel and Hamas in the Middle East. And recently, Joe Biden, I think it was a kind of a shrewd swamp type kind of move, but he basically has bundled together aid to Israel predicated on also funding the ongoing war with between Russia and Ukraine. So $106 billion aid package. You can't have one without the other. What's your thought on that, about funding Ukraine and Israel, Walter?
Well, I'm a libertarian, so I'm opposed to all foreign aid, all government-to-government transfers. We shouldn't really call it foreign aid because that implies that there's aid. A much more neutral way to describe it would be government-to-government transfers of income. Now, one of my favorite people on this issue is Peter Bauer, and he said he summarized foreign aid, so-called, on the basis of three M's. M as in Mary. And the three M's were, what were the three M's? Monuments, machine guns, and what was the third one? I can't even think of it. The idea here is that a lot of foreign aid goes for a statue for the dictator. And sometimes what you have is not so much a statue of the dictator, but a steel mill. And the steel mill in the recipient country makes steel at the 5 times the price of imported steel. So it's I remember monuments, Mercedes, and machine guns. So that's the monuments. The Mercedes is the dictator gets very rich. There are all sorts of cases. Papa Doc Duvalier in Haiti, who ended up a very, very rich man with a lot of Mercedes. And the third one is machine guns. And we know what the machine guns are used for, to keep the people subjugated even more. So that would be the general case against all foreign aid. If you want to help people in other countries, let the government get out of it. Let private church groups or charitable organizations help with starving peoples or whatever. Libertarians have no objection whatsoever to that. Okay, so that's the general view that I would have on foreign aid. Now, let me talk about foreign aid to Ukraine and then foreign aid to Israel. So I'm against foreign aid. However, if the U.S. had to give any foreign aid, I would say they should give foreign aid to Russia, not to the Ukraine, because Russia is in the right in the war between Russia and the Ukraine. So why do I say that? It sounds a little weird. It sounds a little unusual, to say the least. Well, let's go back to, I think it was 1992, when East and West Germany were amalgamated into one Germany. And the Cold War was over, maybe 91, 92. I'm not a historian, somewhere in there. And
well, for people who believe
hello?
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Walter.
The promise that...
No, go ahead, Walter.
The promise that was made at the time was that the Cold War would be over, and NATO should have disbanded, and the Warsaw Pact should have disbanded. And there was a promise made that if NATO stayed in, they would not creep eastward. They would not creep eastward. They would not move eastward. And what should have happened is that NATO should have disbanded and Warsaw Pact should have disbanded because they were the key elements of the Cold War. And the Cold War should have been over. We should have had peace. And instead, what's been happening is that NATO keeps creeping east. Now, look, Germany has invaded Russia twice in the last century. The US also invaded Russia. Everyone's invading Russia. Well, I shouldn't say everyone's invading Russia, but a lot of people are invading Russia. And Russia is a little bit upset, a little bit unhappy with being invaded. And it was interesting in 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. At that time, the U.S. had military bases all around Russia and Turkey and Iraq, Iran, all around. And Russia had one foreign military base 90 miles away from the U.S. in Cuba. And boy, oh boy, did the U.S. not like that. So the idea here is when you have two nuclear powers, Russia and the United States, what we libertarians want to do is make sure there's no war between them. And one way to make sure there's no war between them is to keep each of them separate from the other. You know, if there are two guys fighting and we don't want the fight to occur, what we do is we try to separate the antagonists. Now, let me try this on you. Suppose that Brazil had invaded the U.S. Twice in the last century. And Brazil was a very, very powerful country, as was the U.S., but Brazil had invaded the U.S. twice in the last century. And at the time, there was, in Mexico, there was a government that was friendly to the U.S. And then what Brazil did, those rascals, they undermined the government of Mexico, and they installed a Mexican government that was very anti-U.S. And then they started creeping up through Central America, up through Mexico, and they keep they have this thing called CATO, Southeastern Organization, the Treaty Organization. And the U.S. wouldn't like that. Well, it's a perfect analogy. Only instead of Brazil, we have the U.S., and instead of Mexico, we have Ukraine. And what keeps happening is that NATO keeps moving eastward, and now they're in Ukraine. And what they did is they undermined a government in Ukraine 5 or 6 years ago that was relatively friendly to Russia, and Russia was happy. And Russia kept saying, look, we're unhappy with this movement eastward of NATO. And not only eastward, but you're getting in Sweden and Norway and Finland, and you keep ganging up on us. So I'm against foreign aid, but I think that Russia is in the right on this. They feel beleaguered, they feel invaded. When the U.S. Was dealt with the Cuban Missile Crisis, what the U.S. did is they put a blockade around Cuba. Well, a blockade is an act of war. It's similar to what the U.S. did to Japan in 1943 or maybe 1941. They had a blockade around Japan, which was an act of war, which led to the bombing in Hawaii. So. Again, I say I'm against foreign aid. However, if there had to be any foreign aid, it would be better for the U.S. government to give foreign aid to Russia, not to Ukraine, because Russia is in the right. Russia is fighting a defensive war. Ukraine is fighting an offensive war as sort of a spearhead of NATO. So that's my view in 5 minutes on what do you call it, on Ukraine and Russia. Now let me talk a little bit about Israel. I'm also against, I'm against every foreign aid to every country, but I'm particularly against foreign aid to Israel. Why am I particularly against foreign aid to Israel? Because I'm a big, big supporter of Israel. And I think what the foreign aid does to Israel, it puts Israel in the U.S. pocket. Israel fights its enemies with one hand behind its back because they're afraid to upset the U.S. Right now, Biden is insisting, Anthony Blinken is insisting that the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF, allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. Allow humanitarian aid into Gaza while they've got hostages? That's crazy. what the IDF should do with Hamas is say, look, for every truck that we let in there, you let one or two or three or whatever hostages go, and if you don't let any hostages go, well, you're not getting any trucks. This is a serious war. The U.S. also made, under Eisenhower, made Israel give back the Sinai Peninsula that they had won fair and square in a defensive war. Look, if country A declares war on country B and country A is the aggressor, and then country A loses and they lose some of their territory, well, then country B should keep that territory. So my objection to aid to Israel, part of it is I'm against aid to any country. Not only for the 3Ms, but who's paying for this aid? The taxpayers. And why should the U.S. taxpayers be forced to contribute money to any other country? They shouldn't be forced to contribute money to any other country. So we should be against all foreign aid because it's a violation of the rights of the citizens. They didn't agree to be paying any of this money. And the second reason, as a supporter of Israel, I think paradoxically, foreign aid weakens Israel. It doesn't strengthen Israel. It makes Israel worry so much about, I don't know, about world opinion, about what the UN says. If they weren't so dependent on that, they could fight their enemies with two hands behind their back. Let me give you another analogy. Suppose Liechtenstein started bombing Germany, or Monaco started bombing France. Well, how would France and Germany react to this? Germany would go to the Liechtensteinians and say, hey, what are you guys doing? Was this an accident? We're going to come in there and make sure that this accident doesn't occur again. And France would say the same thing to Monaco. Now, suppose Monaco and Liechtenstein said, look, this was no accident. This is on purpose. And we're going to keep bombing the crap out of you until you give up or something. Well, then there'd be no more Monaco. There'd be no more Liechtenstein. France would treat Monaco and Germany would treat Liechtenstein roughly the way the U.S. treated Germany and Japan at the end of World War II. That would be it. There'd be no more continual fighting. When you get and what I'm saying, the analogy here is that Israel is to Hamas as Germany is to Liechtenstein, as France is to Monaco. Namely, Germany and France and Israel are very, very powerful countries compared to Liechtenstein, Monaco, and Hamas. So what would have happened if the Israelis were not so dependent upon the U.S. and world opinion is the first time Hamas or Hezbollah or anyone like that did anything, they would be smushed, to put a technical word on it, and that would be it. Instead, what happens is every couple of months, you get a rocket ship going where people go through the tunnel and kill one or two Israelis. Every 5 years, there's a serious war. And now there's this just bestial killing of 1,400 people and taking hostages. So what I'm saying is that the foreign aid is a detriment to Israel. And as a supporter of Israel, I don't want them to have a detriment. I don't want them to fight with one hand behind their back. I want them to fight the way the U.S. fought Germany and Japan in World War II. And that's it. Once World War II was over, Japan is not launching any attacks on the U.S. Germany is not launching any attacks on the U.S. Well, if Israel didn't have the foreign aid and could fight them with no hands behind their back, there'd be no more Hamas, there'd be no more Hezbollah, there'd be no more enemies in wherever, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, any of these countries, and there'd be peace. So that would be my case against foreign aid to Israel.
So, Walter, I've always wanted to ask you this. When I was going to school back east, where I met you, I encountered the book Anarchy, State, and Utopia by, I guess, the libertarian-ish philosopher Robert Nozick. And he said that there shouldn't be any forced redistribution of goods outside the consent of the individual involved. So my question is, in a representative government like the United States, where we vote in congressmen or congresswomen or senators, don't we give them our consent by to tax or to use our taxpayer money to, basically give it to, places like Israel or Ukraine. Because we can't on every single issue get the will of the people, right? I mean, obviously we can't, like, every single issue that comes down the pike, we can't wait to take a poll or something. How can we have the consent of the people to be able to do foreign aid? Shouldn't so when we vote somebody in, aren't we giving that representative our consent to give foreign aid to another country, or no? Or do I get that wrong?
No, no, no. You're making a very good point, a very excellent point. Namely, what you're doing is, how shall I say, equating or analogizing between a contract and and the relationship of the government and the citizenry. Look, there are all sorts of contracts where, let's say, Lee, I hire you to be my real estate manager of a condominium association or real estate holdings with 500 tenants. And I say, Lee, you're my agent. Deal with all these tenants. You have 500 tenants. This one needs a refrigerator, whatever. And I've hired you to be my agent and go take care of all these tenants. And the argument that is made not by Nozick, but by, well, Nozick would probably make this argument too, but I'm not sure about that. And the argument is that there's sort of an analogy between me hiring you to be my agent, and I don't look over your shoulder for every jot and tittle. I mean, if you give this tenant a refrigerator, I'm not going to say anything about it. You're my agent, and I've embodied you to act as my agent. And the argument here is that we, the citizens, have made a contract in effect with the government, and we're not going to tell the government to do have a vote on foreign aid and should we have a minimum wage law. We're going to let every 4 years we're going to renew the contract, and we're going to tell the government, whether it's the Supreme Court indirectly or the Congress indirectly or the president more directly, go represent us and do your thing in our behalf. That's the argument.
So
I think it's a fallacious argument, because when I made a contract to hire you, I signed something and I paid you money voluntarily. But there's no such agreement. I don't remember signing any agreement with the U.S. government to represent me. Now, let's talk about when the U.S. government started. When the U.S. government started, there were 13 colonies. And later on, they expanded out to Pennsylvania and Ohio. And here is a sort of a story. So the U.S. government comes out to this guy in Ohio and says, hey, we started the U.S. government and you're part of it. And the guy in Ohio or Western Pennsylvania or wherever it was that was not really part of this 13 colonies, they said, oh, yeah, that's great. I wish you the best of luck. We'll trade with you. We'll be good neighbors. And the guy from Washington, D.C., I don't know if the capital was Washington, D.C. then, maybe Philadelphia, said, you don't understand. You're part of the government. You're a citizen. And the guy said, well, I don't want to be a citizen. And the guy said, tough. Now, look, take those 13 colonies. Was there a unanimous agreement that we should have the state of Virginia or the state of Georgia? No. Whereas you and I, Lee, we had unanimous agreement. You and I were the only parties to the contract, and we unanimously agreed that I would pay you money and you would be my agent. But there's no such thing here with the U.S. government. The U.S. government, I'm now speaking as an anarchist, the U.S. government is a band of robbers and criminals, because there's no agreement to be paid. And yet, if you don't pay your taxes, well, the first thing that's going to happen if you don't pay your taxes, they're not going to be nasty. They're going to write you a nice letter and say, hey, we really need the money. We're doing great things. We're giving money to Israel. We're giving money to Ukraine. We're having welfare. We need your money. Please give us money. And then if you don't reply, the second letter will be a little stronger. We really need the money. And if you don't give us this money, you're going to be in trouble. And after the third or the fourth letter, what's going to happen? There's going to be a guy in a blue uniform with a badge and a gun. And he's going to say, come with me. He's going to take you to jail for not paying money that you haven't agreed to pay. Well, we have a word for people who demand money from others who haven't agreed to pay, and it's called robbers. The government is a robber, a thief, a criminal. So I think the analogy fails, that they're not our agent. And then this whole thing with voting. Well, voting is a secret ballot. Anyone can vote. Who knows who's agreeing? Whereas, Lee, when you and I had this agreement, there was no secret ballot. I knew you, you knew me. We had a handshake maybe, and we had a contract. So I think that the argument that the U.S. government is predicated on a voluntary contract with the citizens that it represents is fallacious.
I love having you on here because of this, because contrary to some people's opinion, I am not progressive. And I got to be really clear on that. I am not progressive. I guess I'd probably be where Rand Paul is, Walter, very conservative with definitely libertarian views. I'm not where you're at, but by any means, but the reason why we have you on quite often is because I'm super sympathetic to what you're saying. Taxation is theft. I agree, tremendously with that. I'm probably not exactly where you're at, but I wanted to ask you one last question before I let students come on here and ask you questions, because some of these guys are pretty libertarian. Actually, Devin here is probably more libertarian than I am, more of an anarchist. But
maybe.
But let me ask you this, Walter. So how does your view differ from the minimal state? If I understand Robert Nozick's view, and if you might be a person that just turned on to my show for the first time in this podcast, we're talking about foreign aid to Israel. We have in our through Zoom, we're interviewing one of the preeminent libertarian economists in the United States, Dr. Walter Block, who teaches economics at Loyola University in down in New Orleans. He's been influenced by Ayn Rand. He's been a major author in Reason magazine and all kind of libertarian periodicals, written books on libertarian thought. He's had hundreds, if not thousands, of articles published on libertarian thought, and I always want to have him on. But so, from what I understand, Walter, Robert Nozick believed in a minimal state. He believed in a non-aggression principle, and that the government exists for very minimal contract between the government and the people to have like a military or police, the court system to protect citizens from aggression, theft, breach of contract, fraud, and enforce property laws. Other than that, Robert Nozick, at least at one time, I heard he changed and got more progressive as he got older, but maybe that's because he taught at Harvard and he kind of just assimilated John Rawls' theory of justice kind of views. But the point I wanted to make was, how does your view differ from Robert Nozick in the minimal state? Because it seems like you, in many ways, you're not even like a libertarian. You're almost like an anarchist, or just how do you address the difference between your view and his?
Well, the way I see it, let me give you a rundown. Who are the ball players of libertarianism? And the way I see it, there are really four categories. The first, best category, the one that is most compatible with libertarianism, is anarcho-capitalists like me and Murray Rothbard, who would be the main leader of our group. And the idea here is that the essence of libertarianism is the non-aggression principle. The non-aggression principle says you should not compel anyone to do anything. The only laws that are legitimate are the laws against murder, rape, theft, kidnapping, violence, fraud, things like that. Anything else goes. And the way to make sure that we have civilized order is with competing defense court agencies. So there's no government, because government is necessarily violating the non-aggression principle. So we anarcho-capitalists comprise about 1% of libertarianism. And the other three groups, roughly, I think, would be 33% each. So what's the second group? The second group is called minarchists. And the chief people associated with this would be Ayn Rand and Robert Nozick. And the idea here is, yes, we do need a government, but the government has only one function, and that's to protect persons and property rights. And to that end, there are only three institutions that are justified. Armies, to keep foreign bad guys off of us, not to go around the world with 800 military bases and try to control the world, but just to defend the country against possible attack. Secondly, police, to keep local bad guys off of us, not to stop victimless crimes, because drugs would be legal, pornography, prostitution, gambling would all be legal. And the only function of the police is to stop rapists and murderers and thieves. And the third is courts. And courts would be to determine guilt and if there's a contract dispute, to settle that. So that's the second group, and they also comprise 1/3 of libertarians. The third group I would call constitutionalists. And the main people associated with this would be Rand Paul and Ron Paul. What's the difference between constitutionalists and minarchists? Well, the Constitution allows a few other things beside armies, courts, and police. Namely, they allowed post offices, post roads, and a few other things. And but the way the constitutionalists would operate is the way they would interpret the Constitution would be very different than the way the Supreme Court previously is interpreting it. And then the fourth group would be what I call classical liberals. And the most famous people associated with that group would be Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek. And there they agree with armies, courts, and police. And they certainly agree with government roads and post offices and a few other constitutional things. But then they would add a few more things like very, very limited welfare, not for able-bodied people who are lazy, but for people who are very needy, like mothers with babies and sick people and people like that. So that would be the libertarian ballpark, or the ball players, these four groups. And I think I'm a member of the Rothbardian group, the anarcho-capitalists, because we take the non-aggression principle rabidly, maniacally, very seriously, whereas the other three groups compromise a little bit on the non-aggression principle. And they say, well, we really need a government. And yes, the government has to be able to compel people to pay taxes. For the minarchists, very little taxes. For the constitutions, a little bit more. And for the classical liberals, a little bit more. Maybe for the first group, 5% of the GDP goes to government. Second group, 10%. The third group, 15%. Although I once asked Milton Friedman what would be the justified tax ratio compared to the GDP, and he said 10%, where I guess he got that from religious tithing. So that's the way I see the group. And Nozick is in the second most compatible with libertarian group, and Rand and Ron Paul would be in the third, and then Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman would be in the fourth.
So, Walter, I'm going to have these guys. I'm going to ask this question, but answer this at the end, because I want these guys to be able to ask this. That I thought about Teddy Roosevelt, who I guess was a Republican with progressive views. Save this to the end answering this, but if we didn't have some kind of way the government would preserve like Yosemite or some kind of land, how wouldn't capitalists come in there and basically just make it a a parking lot or a condominium. But anyways, that's a lot. Answer that. Follow up on that at the very end. But then, Devin, did you want to? You seem like you're chomping at the bit to ask him some questions, or
Oh no, I just have I know exactly the answer to that last one. You see, the corporation would try to do whatever they're trying to do, and then the rest of us not having to worry about a government stopping us from stopping them would just stop them. And then we'd do Pinkertons versus people who want a Yosemite. That's how it would go if there was no government.
well, since you
Violence.
since you
That's
addressed
what would
that,
happen.
Walter, would you say so? The private sector would handle something like I've lived in California most of my adult life, and I mean, California is a wasteland of homeless blight right now, but the great ocean, the Pacific Ocean. One time I took with my best friend, we went all the way up to the Bay Area on PCH, Highway 1. We went all the way up there and we saw these spectacular beaches, Pismo Beach. We were at these beaches. But a lot of capitalists would just like to privatize all those beaches and separate those from
The peasants.
from just the average person. So you believe that the private sector should handle, like, basically there wouldn't be any, you just would have these plants, or you'd have these high-rise apartments in Yosemite. Like, how do you have like national park? You guess there'd be no national park system or anything in your view, right?
Well, before I get to national parks, let me talk about two other things. One is we should privatize all the highways, and the other is we should privatize all the bodies of water, like the Mississippi River. Do you know how many people die on the socialist highways? 40,000 people a year die on the socialist highways. Why is this? Because there's no competition. Whereas if we had different road owners competing with each other, one of the things they would compete with each other on the basis of would be reducing these deaths. Like right now, to get on Highway 10 or Highway 95 or Highway 5, everyone has to do at least 40 and at most 70 miles an hour. Would it be better if on the right lane everyone had to do 60, on the left lane, in the middle lane everyone had to do 70, and on the left lane everyone had to do 80? Would that save lives? The answer is we don't know, because the rules of the highway come from Washington, D.C. with a monopoly, and there's no competition. Now, maybe 60, 70, 80 wouldn't be the best way to do it. Maybe it should be 50, 70, and 90. I don't know. All I know is the reason we have pretty good pens, and the reason we have pretty good cough drops, and the reason we have pretty good shirts is because we have competition, and different people try different things, and the ones that satisfy the consumers more make a profit, and the ones that don't satisfy the consumers more make a loss and have to go do something else. So the reason we have a pretty good economy is because of competition and free enterprise. Well, why shouldn't that apply to highways? I have an entire book on that. The second one, why shouldn't the Mississippi River be privatized? Look, do you know what happened in Katrina? I was in New Orleans. Katrina didn't hit New Orleans, by the way. It hit 40 miles east of us in Mississippi. But you know why 1,900 people died in the aftermath of Katrina? The levees fell. And who is in charge of building the levees?
The government?
The Army Corps of Engineers. Now, look, as an economist, it doesn't bother me that much that 1,900 people died. It's very bad as a person, but as an economist, that's neither here nor there. What really bothers me is that those same people are still in charge of the Mississippi River. Whereas if the Mississippi River were owned privately, and they killed 1,900 people. Well, look, what would happen if McDonald's killed 1,900 people? There'd be no more McDonald's. You go to Burger King, you go to Wendy's. So that's why we have a pretty good economy, because when you do a good job, you make money and you expand your base of operations. And when you do a poor job, like the horse and buggy industry gave way to the car industry. Now let's talk about the national parks, or Central Park in New York City, or Audubon Park in New Orleans, or these other national parks that you were talking about before. If they were privately owned, they'd be owned by a entrepreneur who would try to maximize profits. Well, how do you maximize profits? The way you maximize profits is by satisfying the most consumers. Well, if high rises were justified in the national park, then there'd be high rises. And if they weren't, and if the high rises were put in, they'd lose money, because there are two ways to gain money. One is by high rises, and the other is by charging an entry fee into the park. And if you can make more money by the entry fee, which I strongly suspect, I very much doubt that there'd be any high rises in any of these national parks. But if somebody was stupid enough to do that, well, then he'd lose money, and the high rises would be knocked down. So I think to say that we can't trust the capitalists to own national parks or beaches or anything else like that is just socialist, highly problematic socialist viewpoint. No, the government is a mess. Not only is it immoral and vicious because they violate the non-aggression principle, they're also inefficient. Look, my favorite statistic on this was in Russia. And in Russia, during collectivized farming, the collectivized farming was 97% of all the arable land. And guess how many crops they produced? 75% of the crops. And the 3% of the land that was owned by the workers in the form of a front yard and a backyard, you know how much of the crops they produced? 25% of the crops. The free enterprise system is way more efficient than socialism, and this works whether it's farmland or real estate or cough drops or pens or shirts or anything you can imagine. So I don't want to hear this about how they couldn't somehow they couldn't do beaches, or they couldn't do national parks, or they couldn't do roads, or they couldn't do anything. They can do everything.
So you guys, before we let Walter go, because we got some sports to talk about and your guys' esoteric stuff that you guys generally talk about.
I was gonna go all anarcho-capitalist on him.
So
instead of esoteric.
Hey, so here's one thing. All three of you guys, if you guys have one question for him, form your best question. One question each.
It doesn't have to be a question. It could be a comment.
You got a comment. You got a comment. So Devin,
as long as it's 30 seconds or a minute.
I'm going to say something until Devin's ready. Devin, when you're ready, you raise your hand. But I'm going to say this. I don't know if I agree with. This is where, see, he's a pure libertarian. Okay. I'm more on the Ron Paul side. Okay, on this. But one thing my struggle is this. We're having this very real issue in California right now, where this person, a multi-billionaire guy, has purchased a beach near Pismo Beach where he doesn't want anybody else to see that beach. So he's put a gigantic wall. I assume, look, because of my Christianity, I'm not trying to force it in here, you guys, just wedge it in here, but my Christianity says that human beings are inherently evil. Okay. And people, they're only out for themselves. Okay. And that what's going to happen is that you're going to have these Elon Musks, you're going to have these Bill Gates kind of individuals, and they're going to build their own fortresses all across the coast of California, and nobody's going to be able to get into it. And, so I challenge Walter, and I am skeptical to give the beaches to pure capitalism, the national parks, because people are just going to get greedy and shut out people, or just charge exorbitant prices for, anything. You got anything about that?
I think if the market is left up to be decided by the failures of these corporations, if these failures are going to determine what the limits are, then you're going to at some point experience every failure that's possible in that market structure. And so if you leave it up to the limits, if the limits are going to be set by like, oh, well, if we build this high-rise complex here, people won't buy it. They still already built the high-rise complex there. You fail once in a national park, you can't just go back to it being a national park. You've already destroyed the landscape. You've forever altered that area, you know? And it kind of goes, it's the same for all parts of life. If the boundary is determined by failure, then you're going to see every failure. And those aren't going to affect the people that are financing the failure. They're going to end up affecting the regular people that just happen to live near where those failures happen.
EA would.
I would say in response to this statement that all human beings make mistakes. We're the mistake-making animals. Entrepreneurs, private enterprises make mistakes. Government officials also make mistakes. The only difference is that when the government official makes a mistake, he doesn't automatically have to pay a penalty for it. He gets voted on or not in 4 years, and people forget about it, or they voted on other things about how good looking he is or how amiable or whatever. Whereas when a private enterpriser makes a mistake, he loses money. So of course we're going to expect a better situation from private enterprise than from government. Will it be perfect? Will entrepreneurs never make a mistake? Of course not. Sometimes there'll be mistakes made by private enterprise, but we have an automatic feedback mechanism there, and we don't have it elsewhere. Now, look, this idea of rich people buying up all the beaches is problematic because, look, 100,000 people can outbid any millionaire for some of those beaches. How are we going to get 100,000 people bidding against them? By an entrepreneur. I'm going to buy one of those beaches, and I'm going to sell tickets to 100,000 people, and I'll be able to outbid the millionaires for a lot of beaches. The millionaires aren't going to get all the beaches; they're going to get some of them. There'll be plenty of look at Disney World and Disneyland, and forget about the fact that they're woke. If they wanted to, they could buy a whole lot of beaches and let a lot of people in there and make them pay money for it. So don't think that the rich are going to hog up everything. The entrepreneurs like Disney are going to be able to get their fair share of stuff in behalf of hundreds of thousands of relatively poor or middle class people.
I don't know. Disney is still the rich. The people at Disney buying those beaches are still
corporate wokeism, but they're still out there.
They're still corporate.
They're woke because it's making them money.
And also these enterprisers, these private enterprisers, you know, they make a mistake and they lose money or whatever, but they make a mistake in a national park and the entire population of the United States loses that national park. Like, that's no longer a thing that exists. You know, you turn Half Dome into a bed and breakfast. You know, you carve out a bunch of bedrooms and stuff, right?
Put a whole bunch of presidents in there.
Yeah, no, like
carved into the side.
It's gone.
Great.
Even, you know, people don't pay for it, whatever, so it shuts down. But there's still, you know, you still completely destroyed essentially this magnificent, you know, natural formation.
Well,
meanwhile, the government is destroying 40,000 people's lives every year with its ownership of the roads. And you're giving me a possibility that they might screw up the beaches and the parks? Well, I'll take the free enterprise system any day.
Well, guys, I want to give Brock, you got any questions you got anything come to your mind?
Not really.
He's our sports guy. One last question or statement from Devin, and we're going to let Walter go, and then we're going to get into your normal bag of tricks of sports and esotericism with Jackson Carter Pallmeyer and Devin Scott. But let's you've been out there writing furiously. What do you got for Walter? Give us something, man.
I'm going to try to hit everything we talked about at least a little bit.
But give us some kind of a question, something.
When there are wars like what we're seeing, a lot of refugees, a lot of migration, as you're going to see with wars, there's a huge chance for human trafficking. Really, they would see it as an opportunity. In fact, it's a whole industry. So when you just rely on charities to help out refugees, really what you're doing is you're not leaving any oversight for the people doing that. So you can just have body snatchers. Hi, I'm an organization. I'll give you free water. Yeah, just come into my tent. All right. This happens all the time. All the time. That's just one part. Corporations at least what I've been seeing, and I doubt anyone will disagree with me. Corporations weaponize governments through lobbying. So they weaponize the government. Government monopolizes the violence through surveillance, terror, obviously through just government being present, police, um, terrorist organizations, Iran. Like we all know, like if you just look up on the internet, we all know they fund Hamas. And before they attacked Israel, guess what? They got $6 billion to do whatever they want because we paid them to give us our people back, which is crazy, right? So, and then obviously the monopolization of necessities. I'm still talking about governments, right? And what they monopolize. So I have to have water through the government or through the local water plant. I have to have electricity through the local whatever,
or live off the grid.
Or no, if I have a house on the grid, if I don't have water and electricity in most places, I can't say this for every county, you will be like, even if I provide my own water and I provide my own electricity, right? They will still kick you out unless you are on the grid in a lot of these places. So they monopolize your needs, your wants, the war, right? They decide whether or not we go to war. I mean, no one, like, name one American war other than maybe the Civil War, where everyone's like, yeah, let's do this. But so on top of that, everyone likes to talk about money. Money is just a distraction. Money is a tool to keep people in control. What really what the problem is the violence and the ability to do violence, which I'm not a violent guy. Well, okay. I don't support violence, right? But I also very much don't support taking away the ability to do violence. I'm not a peaceful person unless I have the ability to conduct violence, right? So
I think you've touched the waterfront with about 6 or 7 different very important points, and I thank you for them. And I don't know that I can do justice to all of them, but
I'm wrapping it up. I'm wrapping it up.
I got to get off.
I apologize.
Let him make his final statement.
Well, what do you think about at least when it comes to corporations weaponizing governments and then governments weaponizing shadow organizations such as cartels, gangs, stuff like that, or even just intelligence agencies to do their dirty?
Look, government is not the only evil. There are private enterprise criminals. There are hoodlums. There are corporations that are evil. Don't think that the anarchists think that only government is evil. There are rapists who are private enterprise rapists, so to speak. There are murderers. There's Murder Incorporated. There are corporations that behave badly, and the Libertarian would oppose them all. We're not against violence. We're only against initiatory violence. We're certainly not against defensive violence, and I'm sure you would agree with me on that. We don't have to be pacifists. With regard to welfare, welfare breaks up the family. We always had welfare in this country, but up until LBJ's Great Society in 1965, welfare was very, very small. And the number of kids that were brought up with two-parent households was, I don't know, 95%, something like that. Nowadays, a majority of children in certain communities are brought up without a father in the family, and you have a lot of crime because the mother is unable to deal with 15-year-old boys. So I think that welfare is a disaster, and I think government is a disaster, and private enterprise is a disaster when they violate the non-aggression principle. But when they don't, all they do is buy up a beach and then sell tickets to go to the beach, they can outcompete very, very large corporations or very rich people who want an acre of beach for themselves. Lee, it's always been a great pleasure being with you, and I hope you invite me on your show again. And I'll let you get on with your show, and I'm getting off here. So thanks again for having me, and take care.
Thanks, Walter. We love you, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Great. Take care. Bye.
Seems like every week towards the end we get a little static. We'll have to have Ethan try to hone that out, but guys, I love that guy. I mean, I don't agree with everything he says. I mean,
definitely not the Russian part.
Yeah.
Cold War never ended.
Yeah.
Cold War never ended.
Yeah. So I don't agree with that guy and everything, but you know what? He makes some good points on some things. I would say that's why I'm probably in the category of the Rand Paul, minimal. I want the least amount of government interference, the least amount of taxation in my life. But I'm skeptical of human nature. But let's get over into sports real quick with Brock, and then we'll work ourselves down the line here. Okay, Brock, we have got the Texas Rangers in the World Series.
Wow, I still can't believe it. I mean, it's been 12 years since that happened. It's
the third time in their 60-year history.
Yep.
So how did this happen? Did they just get the right? The last couple of years, they've got a couple really good draft picks, right? I mean, not draft picks, but free agents, right?
Right. They've been pretty mediocre the last few years. They signed Corey Seager in 2021. He's pretty much been the top dog for that team, and here we are now.
But it just came together. They got really hot. Then they didn't even win their division at the last game of the season. Like the Houston took over.
Yep, the Astros finished in first. Rangers just missed out on winning the division, but their whole lineup all came together at once, and then rolled through Tampa Bay, rolled through Baltimore, and then destroyed the Astros in Game 7.
So, are the Phillies playing right now?
They play in, what time is it right now? It's like
closing on 7.
So they play at 7:05.
Okay,
so that's that.
Yeah.
But anyways,
10 minutes.
So let's run down some games real quick before we close out here with these guys. So first of all, there's massive controversy of University of Michigan.
Right. There's been their coaching and all that's accused of stealing signs.
Well, it doesn't look like there's even an accusation. It's a fact because they've got ticket stubs that this guy went to 11 different schools.
Right. They're saying they found like one of their like scouting directors like ticket records or whatever. They said he went to over 20 games from different teams. So, these accusations might actually have some merit here.
Well, one of the things that this guy is this, I forget his name, but the guy they have, he's from a military background. He's like a military investigator kind of guy that basically they hired to do like to investigate teams, like, and it's just a big mess.
Right. It's
awful. Was he like ex-NCIS or something?
I don't know, man. Well, Jim Harbaugh, he's got himself in trouble again. He's already been investigated. He stepped out of 3 or 4 games this year because
right, they're already investigating him they're saying he tampered with like college recruits or whatever. They're saying he tried tampering to get different players to play for Michigan.
Well, what happened too, there was a dead period during the COVID that nobody was supposed to recruit during COVID for whatever reasons, and he recruited, I guess. That's what they say.
That's another thing going on.
Yeah.
I got nothing else to do. Of course I'm doing something.
Yeah, so I don't know about all that. Any other big things in sports that we want to talk about before we move on?
So we got Diamondbacks Phillies Game 7. We got the NBA starting tonight. We got NFL season obviously going on, NHL season too.
Yeah, Detroit Red Wings are doing pretty good this year.
Yep, they've had a hot start this season.
Did they get a new draft pick or no, they got a free agent, right?
They traded for Alex DeBrincat in the offseason. They kept their main draft guys they drafted a few years ago. They've looked pretty good.
Yeah. Well, we'll circle back, but next week, guys, it's the 50th episode of the Lee Enochs show. You guys are invited on. No guests next week. It's just us.
Nice.
So let's just talk whatever we want to next week. But it took a long time to get all the way to 50 episodes, because we took summers off and breaks off. But lo and behold, next week, so we'll get into some issues. But I want you two guys to lead next week, and I'm just going to be a bystander and just chime in, you know.
I'll
So,
see if I
Love it,
can. I'll
love
see
it.
if I can bring Lee back for the next week's
Yeah,
episode too.
yeah, that's great. So anything on the hot plate here, Jackson Carter?
Well, Mr. Devin Scott over here actually reminded me of something that you brought up, I think twice. You said, you have very little trust in human nature, right?
I don't.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
I'm skeptical of human beings.
that's fair. So, I think the question that we wanted to raise was, do you think that humans are inherently evil?
Absolutely. So
Absolutely.
so one thing I don't talk about. Now, one thing you guys probably don't know is if there's any flack that this show gets, I get it, through emails, through text.
Oh yeah, definitely. Send them my way.
I'd
I'll argue with them.
to see like the hate, like
comments we
get.
get. Especially if I get anything.
But you guys, I get hate mail.
Yeah.
I've had one group said, "You're a fake Christian." They said to me last week, "You're a fake Christian. You're really boastful about your education." I don't think. I mean, if you guys have been on the show, I don't drop everything. I mean, I do having guys like that. I wouldn't even know this guy if had he not come to school back east when I was going to school back there. You make connections, right? But anyways, I've taken a lot of heat from people saying I'm a secular conservative. But anyways, all that's not true. And I'm going to drop my educational background for one reason right now, because I do have degrees from Princeton Theological Seminary and other schools in theology. So theology, while it's not my main emphasis here on this show, it's more like political science, political philosophy, sports.
Yeah.
But I do come from a perspective in theology, what's called the Augustinian Calvinist type kind of view. And what that basically says is that humanity in Adam fell into sin, and all subsequent human beings are fallen, that we live in a fallen creation. Hold on one second, Devin. And that human beings outside the grace of Christ cannot please God because we're fallen creatures. For sure, that's my theology. That's a debate even within Christianity, that there's some people that are more of a Arminian, Pelagian view that have a better view of human nature than I do. I generally believe that people are out for their own interests, that people operate in like a egoism, that people function ultimately to make things better for themselves and work out for their own interests. That's kind of my philosophy on that. Human experience. But you were going to say something there, Devin?
No, I mean, how you put it there is, I mean, I can't really argue, because even if someone has altruistic motivations, right? I want to do good things for you. Well, why do you want to do good things for me? Well, because it feels good to do good things. Is it selfless or selfish to do good things for other people, especially if you feel good about them, right? We can debate that forever.
Well, look what happened to Brock last week. Brock's trying to help out his fellow man, trying to help. What did you say it was?
It was this guy running his black business or whatever, that whole thing.
Okay, and
Cologne.
So for cologne, and the dude. Now, I gotta say something. Now that I will pull. Recently, somebody said, "Man, you're like such an old man, like a 90-year-old guy." Okay, no, but listen, but I'm an older guy. I'm just going to impart some, break off some knowledge for you, man. Don't be so trusting. Don't be so trusting, Brock. I mean, if there's the one thing that we love you, I believe you got a lot of potential in the future, man. I love your takes on sports, but man, dude, it could have been worse for you. Those guys could have jumped you.
It could have been much worse.
You went out there in a car. Oh, you didn't hear about this?
Well, you almost got jumped in the parking lot?
No, he
No,
got robbed last week.
You got robbed last week?
Yep.
You didn't think, hey, text Devin. Tell him maybe the guy parks out in the dark.
Yeah, they were the ones that robbed my phone, so that's the whole thing.
What happens is
great.
they
Well, I'm
snatched
glad you're
his phone.
here.
We're glad you're here, man.
Yeah.
But just don't be so. And that's my thing. I think people are out. Now look, I hope your selfish. It's called ethical egoism or egoism.
Yeah.
That you guys are on this podcast to advance your self-interest. I am here to advance your guys' self-interest. I want you to become, all three of you guys, great podcaster. I think it serves your interest to be on this show because you're cultivating your skills, your ability to speak, your ability to network. Jackson Carter, our war hero name here, he basically came over and he helped out on some technical things before the show started. You guys, just letting you know, for all three of you, if you do a podcast, Murphy's Law is going to take effect. Absolutely. If you can go wrong, look at the end there. Great podcast, get some static. There's nothing I can do at that.
There's
point.
Nothing. No, I think that was more on his end. He might have bandwidth issues. Basically, he just used up too much of his Wi-Fi before it cycled again.
But let's and Walter, we want you to come back on the show again soon. I don't agree with him on some of that stuff. I am completely against Russia.
We should not.
I'm completely against Russia. And there's other, like Allison, who's the co-host last year or last semester, and Ethan. We interviewed him. I think this is his fourth time he's been on the show, and he was saying that stuff too. I don't know. I think I guess a ruthless dictator. Talking about selfish interests, and what's really bad is that the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church is in cahoots with Putin and justifying the war against Ukraine, to slaughter, in many ways, fellow Christians.
You're surprised by this?
No, I could not.
You're
not
surprised.
I'm not surprised by this because it substantiates my claim that people are corrupt and corrupt people do corrupt things, and I hate it. One thing I want to say is this: Putin is a dictator, just like Hitler, and just like think about this guy, this mercenary leader. Was there any doubt that guy was going to die? I was surprised that he lived for a month after he was. Remember, he was marching on Moscow.
Wait, he died.
That dude died.
Rookie mistake. Never march on Moscow.
Wait. So
yeah, it was kind of a weird.
So Vladimir Putin died, or who died?
No.
There was a guy. I forget.
There was a coup.
There was like the leader of a private army, like
Wagner group. I forget what his name was. Yeah, so that guy was just against the way Putin was leading the war. And he marched with his mercenaries against Moscow, and there was going to be a brutal war. And so somehow the war didn't happen.
Well, it's because his plane crashed.
No. What I'm saying is that right when it happened, somehow he turned back and did. A month later, his plane mysteriously crashes. And Putin has poisoned people. Okay, you guys, if there's some people out there that love Russia, you're invited to email us, and let us know. We want to hear your questions. But I disagree with Walter Block's take on Russia. Another thing I disagree with is
we'll drink vodka over it.
You guys, this is true. Do you think that there would be a Yosemite if beaches were completely privatized?
I think that so remember how
our beaches are better parks.
Hold on. You know what would happen now? Because people are starting to get fed up. That right there, as soon as you take, I don't know, name a beach you love, right? And it could be anyone at home. Name a beach you love. It is now $50 just to find a parking spot for the day. All right. So eventually these beaches would look a lot like either San Francisco or a lot of rich people are going to find that it's not good to monopolize every square inch of nature because someone's going to freak out. We literally need, like the Japanese have caught on to it, we literally need time out in nature or we freak out. So I'm just saying if that were to happen, right? If we allowed that to happen, I'm saying a lot of people would protest first. Like if we were to privatize a lot of this stuff, right, and the government got out of the way, there would be a lot of people marching.
Guys, let's hold off until next week. We've already hour and 10 minutes.
Yep.
Oh my god.
You know, so it's been an awesome night with Walter Block.
Devin Scott.
Jackson Carter Pullmeyer.
And Brock Bergen.
And this has been Lee Enochs. This is the Lee Enochs Show, America's most controversial podcast, signing out. Have a great night. God bless you.